Today, we're diving into one of history's most audacious and, frankly, brilliant hoaxes. It's a story all about identity, performance, and class. The incredible tale of a servant girl who, for a few wild months, had an entire nation convinced she was royalty from some far-off, undiscovered island.
So, picture this. It's Regency England, a time with super rigid social rules. And out of nowhere, this mysterious woman appears. She's speaking a language nobody recognizes, wearing these exotic clothes, and she doesn't just say she's a princess, she lives the part so convincingly that she becomes a national sensation. This is where her unbelievable story really begins. So, to really get this story, we're going to follow her whole journey. We'll start with her mysterious arrival, then look at her masterful performance, see how it all came crashing down, and then uncover the even more remarkable truth behind the whole fantasy. And finally, we'll explore her surprising legacy.
Okay, let's set the scene here. England at this time had just gotten through the Napoleonic Wars, so everyone was on edge, really suspicious of foreigners. If you were a homeless person wandering the countryside, especially one who seemed foreign, you could be seen as a spy and get into some serious trouble. And it's right into this tense atmosphere that our mystery woman walks.
It all starts on April 3rd, 1817. A local cobbler finds her just wandering around. She's got this strange black turban and shawl on, and she's speaking a language that nobody can make heads or tails of. She's taken to the local magistrate, a guy named Samuel Worrell. And this is where one tiny detail changes everything. Her hands. They were soft. Now, in an era where most people did hard physical labor, this was a huge clue. It suggested she wasn't a common worker, and it was the first little piece of evidence that made her story seem, well, believable. The magistrate's wife, Mrs. Worrell, was hooked from the start.
Now, this wasn't just some simple lie she was telling. Oh no, this was a full-blown theatrical production. As soon as she got into the Worrells' home, she started building this whole new reality for herself, one elaborate detail at a time.
She starts pointing to herself, just repeating the word Caraboo. And then, in what has to be the most unbelievable stroke of luck, or maybe something a bit more planned, a Portuguese sailor named Manuel Enesso shows up. And guess what? He claims he can understand her. He translates this absolutely wild story. She's Princess Caraboo from the island of Javasu. She was kidnapped by pirates, and then she heroically escaped by jumping overboard and swimming to shore. So, was this guy Enesso an accomplice, or just a random guy who saw an opportunity? We'll probably never know for sure. But his translation was all it took. Her new identity was officially cemented.
And this is where her genius for performance really takes off. She didn't just tell a story, she became the story. She could fence. She was a great shot with a bow and arrow. She'd swim naked in the lake, which, caused a bit of a stir. And she'd climb trees to pray to her god, who she called Allah Ta'ala. In a brilliant little touch, she saw a pineapple and called it anana, which is actually the correct word in several languages. Every one of these eccentric habits just built on a last, creating this captivating character that was perfect for the Romantic era's obsession with all things exotic.
But the real centerpiece of the whole act was the language. It wasn't just gibberish. She made up an entire language, complete with a consistent vocabulary, its own accent, and even a written script. And what's so fascinating is how people reacted. You had these scholars at Oxford who took one look at her writing and were like, nope, this is humbug, it's fake. But then you had local experts, like this Dr. Wilkinson, who were totally convinced. He even used an encyclopedia of alphabets to prove her script was real. She kept up this linguistic illusion flawlessly, never once slipping up on her own made-up words.
So, for about 10 weeks, Princess Caraboo was the absolute toast of high society. People flocked from all over to see this exotic royal. But, as we all know, fame can be a double-edged sword. The very newspapers that made her famous were the same things that were about to bring her down. You see, stories and pictures of Princess Caraboo were printed and sent all across the country. It was really only a matter of time before someone from her old life would see one. And after 2 months, that's exactly what happened.
And just like that, the house of cards came tumbling down. It was all thanks to a lodging house keeper from Bristol, a woman named Mrs. Neal. She saw a picture of the famous princess in the newspaper and recognized her right away. This was no princess. This was Mary Wilcox, who had recently stayed with her and had entertained her kids with a strange, made-up language. The game was up.
And once that fantasy was shattered, a much harsher and in a lot of ways way more compelling story started to come out.
The story of the real woman behind the mask whose life was a world away from some imaginary island.
I mean, the contrast between the life she made up and the one she was running from is just staggering. Princess Caraboo's story was this swashbuckling romantic adventure. The reality for Mary Wilcox, who also went by Mary Baker, was a life of just grinding poverty, bouncing between dead-end servant jobs and depressing workhouses. Her real history is just heartbreaking. She was born poor, started working when she was only 8. She ended up in a London hospital where she got these scars on her head from a really crude medical procedure. And ironically, those were the same scars that experts later said were from some exotic surgery. She went through so much tragedy, including the death of her baby boy. It was after all this hardship that she started playing around with foreign personas. It was a desperate way to survive, and it eventually evolved into the grand performance of Princess Caraboo.
So how in the world did she pull it off? It wasn't just luck. Her real genius was observation. See, because everyone thought she couldn't understand a word of English, they talked freely right in front of her. So she just listened. She absorbed all their ideas and expectations about exotic places, and then she just mirrored it all back to them perfectly. She knew her audience wanted romance and mystery, and she gave them exactly the story they were dying to believe.
Now, you probably think that being exposed as a fraud would be the end of her story. But for Mary, it was actually just the start of a really strange and unexpected second act. So instead of being punished, Mary kind of became a folk hero. The newspapers loved the story of a poor cobbler's daughter who outsmarted the elite. Mrs. Worrell, in her show of pretty amazing sympathy, actually paid for her to go to America. Her stage career as Princess Caraboo didn't really take off. And after she came back to England, she settled into a surprisingly normal life, selling leeches to the Bristol hospital. A really quiet, respectable end for a woman who was once a national celebrity.
Even though she died in obscurity, her story was just way too good to be forgotten. The legend of Princess Caraboo has stuck around for more than 200 years. And this quote from historian Brian Houghton really gets to the heart of why we're still so fascinated by her. You have to remember, in an age where working-class women had basically zero rights, Mary Wilcox just shattered those class barriers using nothing but her own cleverness and imagination. She didn't just fool high society, she beat them at their own game. Her impact has really lasted. Her life was made into a movie. There's a blue plaque honoring her in Bristol. She's remembered not just as a prankster, but as a symbol of defiance, a true testament to how one determined person can use performance to completely upend the world they were born into.
So, as we wrap this up, what do we really make of Mary Wilcox? Was she just a con artist who manipulated people's kindness? Was she a working-class heroine who exposed how silly the aristocracy could be? Or was she simply a survivor, using the only tools she had to escape a life filled with tragedy? You know, maybe she was all three. Her story really forces us to ask what's more real, the role we're given by birth or the one we have the guts to invent for ourselves.